How is racism handled in comics? And should it be in comics? Well, it's a fact of life, and it's something we deal with on a social level, so it makes sense that it's there. But how do you tackle that? Hey there, this is Perch. I got to thinking about just the various topics around racism for because of a couple reasons. I mean, one, the new Watchmen has premiered and come out, and it's certainly tackling racism as kind of the core of of its storyline. That's a big part of it. And the other is kind of an innocuous. I got an email from somebody who listens to the videos, so thank you for that. But I made a video quite some time ago about the MCU and what to do with it, and I said that we should go with the classic version of the Fantastic Four. That you're rebuilding, reintroducing this family kind of into the MCU, and we should have the classic version. And by that I mean, older Reed Richards, white Johnny Storm, and so on, as opposed to the Michael B. Jordan Johnny Storm. Which, if we could take a step back, I mean, other than the fact that the MCU killed off Killmonger way too early after just one movie, I mean, is anybody unhappy that Jordan did that role? I mean, he was fine as the Human Torch. I think it was a poorly conceived movie, but he was excellent as Killmonger. I mean, I'm glad we got that character in that role. So if I'm gonna pick Killmonger every day of the week. Other than the fact that they killed him, which was a terrible decision. But anyway, be that as it may. So this guy writes me this letter. It's saying, "Hey, so you're racist because you said that it should be a white Johnny Storm. Got it. And I'm going to downvote every video that you ever do from now on because racists should not win." I'm like, okay, okay, dude. I mean, I don't know what to say to that. All right. Um, that seems like kind of a silly use of time, but you go to it anyway. But racism in comics is tough because the comics are built on this fictional fantasy world of superheroes and cape books and everything. When I say comics, actually, I should clarify. I'm talking about the staples of the big two, the superhero books, the books that surround those comics. I'm not talking about indie books that I think are perfectly adept and can handle racism as a topic with some, well, depending on the writer, can either be handled well or handle it poorly. But I mean, it's a topic that can easily fit into that world. But we're talking about kind of superhero cape books. It gets awkward to get into racism when you have people like Professor X and Jean Grey running around. I mean, one of the odd parts about X-Men Red was that Jean Grey was willing to kind of use mental powers and other things to address people, to basically control people and do things. But if you're trying to make a better world, and racism is a terrible thing, which it is. I mean, there's different forms of racism, but yeah, racism's a bad thing. Um, should you not just use your old mind powers to get rid of it? I mean, why not, right? I think that that's the problem with a lot of superhero books. It's why books like The Authority, I think, handled topics like this very well. And that if you got people who can fly around and are ultra powerful and can have all these abilities, at what point do they allow some of the various kind of misdeeds in the real world to go on? I mean, for that matter, if you're tackling topics like rape and murder, wouldn't it be a decent use of Jean Grey's time to kind of go to the American prison system and just mind wipe out those elements? I mean, by the way, you're like, you may be sitting here listening to this going, "Oh, that's absolutely terrible. That would be, you know, putting your will onto other people, and it takes away the concept of humanity and other things." And yeah, it does. But at the same time, where's like the J. Jonah Jameson hot take of saying, "Hey, if Professor X can solve all these things mentally, if he can project his voice into everyone's mind around the Earth to talk about, mutants are here, how about he projects things into everybody's mind to get rid of some of the sicker aspects of our society?" I mean, would that be a violation of rights? Yeah, but is it a violation of rights for these people to go around murdering and raping people? Um, yeah, that seems like a worse violation. I mean, it gets into that gray area, and like I said, the authority handled that well. Of like, at what point does power kind of become its own thing, its own momentum? But back to racism in general, I think racism is a topic. It's tough to handle in comics, and when you look back at racism elements or elements where they're trying to tackle racism in comics, it often comes across as very poor, very not just ill-conceived, just awkward. It does not usually come off particularly well, and part of the reason for that is you've got this long legacy of characters in history. And so you have things that were done in the 40s, with Superman and other things during the war. And you have comics in the 60s and 70s where the sensibilities and behavior of these characters don't match up with current social trends. And so what do you do about that? Do you get in there and you start kind of retroactively fixing them? Well, now you're getting complaints that you're going back and changing history. Or do you have the character have this wake up moment where, like, Superman's, you know, goes and says, I used to be pretty racist against the Asians back during World War II, and that was wrong, and I'm going to be better going forward. I apologize. I'm going to. I mean, do you have that moment in a comic, and should you have that moment in a comic? I mean, on one hand, you shouldn't just erase that those things happened because that was part of Superman's past and fine. But on the other hand, going and harping on it and continuing to bring it up into the public consciousness is not good either. I mean, we do have a society based on a timeline where there are different trends, different changes over time. One of the reasons that works in a society is because it allows us to ultimately kind of erase and make up for things that past generations did. And slavery was terrible, no doubt about it. Slavery was an awful thing, and there's not a but coming in here. It's I guess the nice part about slavery in the U.S. is the people who engaged in slavery, who actively, contributed to that process, are dead, long dead at this point. And so, at what point do you let these things kind of age out and go away, or do you need to continue to remind people of them? I think that's a topic that the country and a lot of people are struggling with right now. Of at what point do you erase, and at what point do you remember? And if you erase, does that mean you repeat it? I tend to think, just from my own perspective, if you just, still, of course, keep slavery in the history books. I think things that happened in history can't be erased, but, you don't, if it wasn't a topic of discussion as much as it is now, it was removed. We weren't going to keep bringing up slavery. We weren't going to keep any of that. I don't think that everybody would kind of forget that it was a bad thing. And in, like, say, 2080, we reintroduce slavery. That's not going to happen. If we have moved on as a culture and a society, we're not going to, suddenly, if we don't talk about it, we're not suddenly going to revert and start being terrible again. I tend to believe, and this is my own personal theory, nobody else needs to go into it but me. My feeling is the more that we've talked about racism and racist issues, or maybe a better way to say it is the way we've talked about racism and racist issues, and because it's been such a continual, constant thing in people's minds, it feels like racism has increased, not decreased in the country. It feels like more people are, it's almost like that knee-jerk reaction to seeing, like, you see this Star Wars trailer 50 times, and by the 50th time, you start to really hate the movie. You have this knee-jerk reaction not to see it because you believe people are pushing it too hard on you. That feels like some of what's happened with racism, because I'm just, from my own life, if I go back to incidents that I've had, racist incidents that have been around me, or people in my vicinity saying racist things, 10 years ago, even 20 years ago, there was a lot less than there is today. People have gotten more comfortable with throwing out racist terms than they used to. And I don't quite understand why that is. Now, some have said, well, those people always had that in them. It was just they knew, they kept it inside, and now they're feeling emboldened to throw it out in public. And maybe so, but that doesn't necessarily make any of this better. It's if you kept it all inside and oh good, now it's out in the open. I'm not sure it's out in the open is an improvement. Where like shouting a racist word out a car window at somebody. Yeah, I'm driving along with a friend of mine who's black, and we pull up, and some guy just starts to shout out the N word out the window as they're passing us. Now, maybe I was driving like a crazy person and didn't know it, and that was why I got that attention, or maybe the person's just nuts. But for some reason, the this individual felt empowered to say that. And again, 20 years ago, wouldn't have done it. I live in a pretty hard left area, so it's not like I'm driving around the backwaters of Texas getting this kind of behavior. No offense to people in Texas, but do you know what I mean? It's there's a certain there's I do believe there's an increase. A lot of people have said no, there's not, but I do believe there's been an increase in racist behavior, and I think it's correlated at some point to this conversation about racism that keeps coming up. And so please don't misunderstand me, like the guy who wrote me the letter, just saying I think Fantastic Four should be classic characters. I'm not suggesting everybody just shut up about it. We don't talk about it. I'm not suggesting everybody just hides it. But I am suggesting that maybe the approach we're using right now is not working, because it feels like it's not working. It feels like we're having the opposite effect. And if somebody could sit down and say, look, it's going to get a lot worse, and then it's going to get better, and then everything will be better, then cool. But I is that the plan? I was not present for that plan. If that was the plan, I didn't. Nobody let me in on that. So just worry. But anyway, in comics, I think certainly if there's a good writer, good writers can handle any topic well. They can do that. But I think that a responsibility to wade into racist comments in a comic is kind of exactly what I've been talking about. I don't know that's the best place. I don't know. I don't think it's the best place. I don't think you get value out of that. I don't think you're teaching somebody a good lesson. I think you're more likely to come off really odd and be one of those examples people point to 20 years from now as backward racism, or just here's how some dumbass tried to solve racism back in the 90s. That's how it feels like it's going. It just feels like it's not the right approach. And I think that topics, serious topics like racism, which is a serious topic, which is an important topic, I think it needs to be talked about. But I think it needs to be talked about in a serious, good way, not like Superman is, talking about why Cyborg is on the team. That's just not the. It's the odds of that going well, I think, are low. Can it be done? Yeah, absolutely. Um, Can it be done poorly? I think more likely it would be done poorly. It would come off very ham-fisted. And again, it brings up the, hey, well, if Superman's fighting for injustice around the world, why doesn't he, fly on over to some of these places that, engage in genocide? I mean, they're killing it begs the question. And if the superhero world was real life, there would be, BuzzFeed or Slate or Vox articles saying, is Superman or Captain Marvel racist? Because we have these, white, all-powerful superheroes, and they have the ability and the power to go over and end ethnic cleansing and some other things go on, but they don't. They hang out. They have bagels with their friend Jessica Drew, or Superman's, trading barbs with Red Mist over Metropolis. That's bad. There's a threat there, but maybe Superman should fly on over and stop some of these armies from wiping out a race. I think once you open the door to the race conversation, you're also opening the door to all these other conversations in comics, and that's why it has to be handled carefully. Anyway, those are my thoughts on it. Race is a hard problem. It's obviously it's a hard problem. It's a terrible thing, but it's a hard thing to talk about in a way that is calm and kind of rational and invites solutions and not just emotion. I think to be hated for your skin color or for any reason that is a surface value, like it's terrible, and there's no excuse for it. The people who do it are ugly, awful people, but it's also something that can't be described on the back of the cereal box. It's got to be properly handled. It's got to be it's a serious topic, so it warrants a serious conversation. I guess that's my view on it. What do you think? Leave me a comment below. Tough topic, but let me know your thoughts on it. How are there ways that comics can help? Are there ways that this being brought up and be part of the conversation within comics adds value, makes things better, or do you agree with me? Do you think it winds up just making things worse? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe. If you have more thoughts on it, follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.